I stood in the empty house where I had raised my children, a house where every corner carried a memory. And in that stillness I realized something that made my hands begin to shake. Not one of them had called me in 3 months. Not on my birthday. Not on Thanksgiving. Not even to send a simple text message, and the silence was deafening. But what hurt the most was that I knew exactly why they had disappeared. I had stopped paying their bills. My name is Barbara. I am 68 years old, and I am recording this story from a place my children will never find me. And honestly, that is exactly how I want it. But before I tell you what I did with the house they were all fighting over, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments, because I want to know I am not alone. I want to know there are other women out there who have felt what I am about to share with you. This story begins 5 years ago, when my husband Richard died, after we had been married for 43 years. And he was a good man, a provider, who left me comfortable, not rich, but comfortable, with a paid-off house worth about $800,000, his life insurance, and his pension. And between that and my own Social Security, I had enough to live well for the rest of my life. I have 3 children. Daniel, my oldest, is 45. Then Jennifer, who is 42, and my youngest, Michael, who just turned 39. In between them, I also have 7 grandchildren. And for years I truly believed I had done everything right as a mother, that I had sacrificed, supported, and cheered them on through every phase of life. That Richard and I had put all 3 through college, helped with the down payments on their first homes, and been there for every crisis, every celebration, every milestone. But after Richard died, something shifted, and at first I told myself they were just being helpful, Daniel suggested. I downsized and said the house was too much for me to handle alone. Jennifer started managing my finances and told me I shouldn't worry my pretty little head about complicated numbers. Michael moved his family closer and said he wanted to keep an eye on me, and I was grieving, lonely, and grateful for their attention. So I didn't see the trap closing around me until it was almost too late. It started small. Daniel's business hit a rough patch and he asked if I could help with his mortgage for just a few months. Jennifer said her daughter needed braces, and with 3 kids money was tight, and asked if I could cover it. Michael's car broke down and he needed reliable transportation for work. Just a loan, Mom, we'll pay you back. And I said yes every time. Because what mother wouldn't? Because these were my children, my babies, and they needed me. And I was certain Richard would have helped them too. So I wrote the checks, covered the bills, and became their safety net, their backup plan, their endless source of emergency funds. Except the emergencies never stopped, and the paybacks never came. And slowly, so slowly, I barely noticed it happening. I stopped being their mother and became something else entirely. A bank, an ATM machine that happened to share their DNA. The requests became constant. Jennifer needed help with her kids' private school tuition. Daniel's business needed an infusion of cash to stay afloat. Michael wanted to renovate his basement. And then there were the birthdays, the holidays, the unexpected expenses that somehow always landed at my door. And one night, when I couldn't sleep, I calculated it all and realized that over 4 years, I had given them close to $300,000. $300,000 of the money Richard and I had worked our entire lives to save. But what really got me was that they no longer asked. They demanded and expected. Jennifer would call and say she had already enrolled her kids in summer camp and needed $4,500 by Friday. Daniel would text me his mortgage payment amount with a reminder that it was due on the 1st. Michael stopped pretending these were loans at all, and I began having nightmares about running out of money, realizing I was dipping into the principal now and not just living off interest and Social Security. Until my financial advisor, a kind man named Thomas, who had worked with Richard for years, sat me down and showed me the projections and told me that at this rate I would be broke in 6 years. Broke at 74, with nothing left and nowhere to go. And he said gently, "Barbara, you need to stop. Your children are adults, and they need to solve their own financial problems." And I knew he was right. God, I knew he was right. But saying no to your children, even when they are middle-aged and even when they are bleeding you dry, is one of the hardest things a mother can do. Because I loved them and wanted them to be happy, secure, and to have good lives. Wasn't that what mothers were supposed to do? So it took me 3 months to work up the courage. 3 months of sleepless nights, anxiety attacks, and practicing what I would say in the mirror. Until finally I called a family meeting, made dinner, set the table nicely, and waited for them to arrive. And only Daniel showed up on time. Jennifer arrived 40 minutes late, and Michael texted that he couldn't make it, but whatever I needed to say, I could just tell him over the phone. That should have been my first clue about how much I actually mattered to them, because I had prepared a whole speech, planned to explain the finances, the projections, and how I needed to protect my future, intending to be kind but firm, loving but clear, and I had even written notes on index cards that I kept tucked into my cardigan pocket. But when I finally opened my mouth, what came out was much simpler. I can't keep giving you money. I'm sorry, but I just can't anymore. And the silence that followed felt like a physical force. As Daniel slowly put down his fork, Jennifer's face went completely blank, and through the speakerphone I heard Michael's sharp intake of breath. Before Jennifer asked, "What do you mean you can't?" in a voice with an edge I had never heard before, cold and hard, like I was a stranger who had just insulted her. And I said, "I mean exactly that," my voice shaking despite my attempt to sound firm, explaining that I had been going through my savings too quickly, and that if I kept this up I wouldn't have anything left for my own future or for my own care if I needed it, while Daniel leaned back in his chair with an unreadable expression and said, "Mom, you have plenty of money. Dad left you very comfortable. You live alone in a house worth almost $1 million. You're being dramatic." And I countered that I was being realistic as I pulled out the papers Thomas had given me and told them to look at the projections and at how much I had given them over the past 4 years, because it wasn't sustainable. But Jennifer snatched the papers from my hand, her perfectly manicured nails catching the light, barely glanced at them, and tossed them back onto the table, while saying the numbers were wrong, and that I was letting that advisor of mine manipulate me, probably because he wanted me to invest more with him or something. And I said Thomas had been nothing but honest with me, feeling heat rise in my cheeks, and that the numbers weren't wrong because I had the bank statements to prove it. When Michael's voice crackled through the phone speaker asking what exactly I was saying, whether I was just cutting them off after everything they did for me, which stopped me cold, because everything you do for me, I asked, "What exactly do you do for me? Are you serious right now?" As Jennifer's voice rose and she insisted that she managed my finances, made sure I wasn't getting scammed, and checked on me constantly. And I told her she managed my finances so she knew exactly how much I had left to take. Watching her face flush red as I added that she didn't check on me, she checked on my bank account. And then Daniel stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor, saying this was unbelievable and that they were my children and family helps family, and that's what Dad would have wanted. And I told him not to dare tell me what his father would have wanted. My voice coming out stronger than it had in years, reminding them that Richard worked himself to exhaustion to provide for this family, saved every penny so we could have security in our old age, and didn't do it so they could drain it all away and leave me with nothing. And the words hung in the air, like smoke, as Jennifer gathered her purse with sharp, angry movements and said they should go because clearly Mom had made up her mind to be selfish. A word that hit me like a slap. Because, after everything I had given them, every sacrifice, every check written, every bill paid, I was selfish for wanting to protect my own future. And I said, fine, quietly, telling them to go but to understand that I loved them more than life itself and that I was done being their ATM, that they were adults with jobs, homes, and families, and it was time they learned to live within their own means. And they left without saying goodbye. Michael hung up without a word, and I sat alone at the dinner table looking at the food I had prepared and the nice dishes I had set out, and cried until I had no tears left. And that was 11 months ago. And in the first few weeks after the meeting I convinced myself things would blow over, that they were angry, hurt, and defensive but would come around because we were family, and you don't just throw away family over money, that they would cool down, reflect, realize I was right, and maybe even apologize. But I was so naive, because the calls stopped completely. Jennifer, who used to call me 3 times a week, went silent. Daniel, who stopped by every Sunday for coffee, never showed up again. Michael blocked me on social media, and when I tried calling them the conversations were brief and cold. Always can't talk right now, Mom, or really busy with work, or the kids have activities. Always an excuse, and always a reason to get off the phone. And I wasn't invited to Daniel's son's birthday party, which broke me because little Tommy was turning 7, and he was my first grandchild, and I had been at every single one of his birthdays since he was born. And I sent a gift anyway, a remote control car he had mentioned wanting, but it was never acknowledged, with no thank you card, no phone call, Nothing. And Thanksgiving came and went after I had hosted it in my house for 43 years, as our tradition. Starting preparations days in advance, and cooking Richard's favorite dishes and making sure everything was perfect. But this year, I waited for someone to mention plans and no one did, until I finally broke down and called Jennifer, who said flatly that they were doing Thanksgiving at Daniel's this year and asked if he hadn't told me. And when I said no with my throat tight, she paused and then said she was sure it had just slipped his mind. "You know how busy he is," she said, and when I asked, "Am I invited?" hating how small my voice sounded, there was another pause, longer this time, before she replied, "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. Things are still really tense. Maybe we should all have some space." And space, I realized, meant they wanted distance from me because I had stopped funding their lifestyles. So I spent Thanksgiving alone for the first time in my life, eating a turkey sandwich and watching old movies, trying not to think about my children and grandchildren gathered together without me. And Christmas was worse, because I sent gifts for all 7 grandchildren, carefully chosen and lovingly wrapped. And I included checks for my kids too, smaller amounts than before but still generous, thinking maybe this would open the door and show them I wasn't abandoning them completely. But the gifts were never acknowledged. Not one thank you. Not one phone call. And while the checks were cashed within days, the silence remained unbroken, and I tried everything, sending texts that went unanswered and leaving voicemails that were ignored, until I even drove to Jennifer's house once and she answered the door but wouldn't let me in, telling me she was really busy and that maybe I should call first next time before closing the door in my face. And I stood there on her porch where I had stood 100 times before, where I had once been welcomed with hugs and coffee and grandchildren running to greet me, and I realized something terrible. They didn't love me. They loved my money, and now that the money was gone, so was their affection. And I spent months in a fog of grief that wasn't like losing Richard, because when Richard died, I had been surrounded by love, support, and people who cared. But this was different. This was being erased from my own family's life, deleted as if I had never mattered at all. And the rejection was suffocating. My doctor put me on antidepressants. I stopped going to my book club because people would ask about my grandchildren, and I couldn't bear to explain why I never saw them anymore. I lost weight. I stopped sleeping well, and the house felt like a mausoleum filled with photos of a family that no longer wanted me. Until one day in March, 8 months after I had stopped the money, I overheard something that changed everything, because I was at the grocery store and saw Daniel's wife, Patricia, in the next aisle, and I almost approached her, desperate for any connection to my family. But something made me hesitate when I heard her voice carrying as she talked on her phone, saying, "I know, right?" She actually thought we'd keep coming around after she cut us off. Like, hello, we have our own lives. And after a pause, there was laughter. And then she said, "Daniel thinks we should just wait her out. She's old. Eventually she'll die, and we'll get the house anyway. So why waste time and energy pretending to care?" And I stood frozen between shelves of canned goods with my shopping basket hanging from my arm, listening to my daughter-in-law laugh about waiting for my death, not because she would miss me but because she wanted my house. And something inside me cracked wide open, but it wasn't pain anymore. It was clarity, ice cold, crystal clear clarity, because they were waiting for me to die so they could inherit my house, had probably already decided among themselves how they would divide it and argued over who would get what percentage. And I realized I was nothing more than an obstacle between them and $800,000 in real estate. My death, a financial event they were anticipating, maybe even hoping for. And I walked out of that grocery store leaving my cart abandoned in the aisle, sat in my car in the parking lot, and for the first time in months I didn't cry. Instead, I called Thomas, my financial advisor, and when he answered I said I needed to talk to him about selling my house. And when he asked if I was sure because it was a big decision and maybe we should talk it through, I interrupted and told him I had never been more sure of anything in my life, that I wanted to sell it as quickly as possible and didn't want my children to know until it was done. And after a long silence he agreed to set up a meeting and asked what I was planning to do. And what I was planning was to take back my life, to stop being a victim, and to make sure that the people who had treated me like a disposable ATM, erased me from their lives, and were literally waiting for me to die, would inherit exactly what they deserved, which was nothing. And I told him I was planning to disappear and needed his help. And if you're still watching, hit that subscribe button because what I did next they never saw coming. and Thomas and I met the very next day in his office, where I brought every financial document I could find, every bank statement and every piece of paper related to my assets, laid them out on his conference table like evidence in a trial, and asked him to walk me through it and tell me what I was looking at if I sold the house. And as he worked through the numbers on his calculator, he told me the market was strong, the house was in excellent condition in a desirable neighborhood, and that we could list it for $850,000 or maybe $900,000 if we were aggressive. And after real estate fees and capital gains taxes, I would walk away with approximately $700,000. $700,000, that combined with what remained of my savings and Richard's life insurance would leave me with close to $1 million, more than enough to start completely over somewhere new. And when I asked how long it would take to sell, he said that in this market, if we priced it right, it could be 30 to 60 days, maybe even faster. I want to do it, I said firmly, telling Thomas that I needed this handled quietly, that I did not want my children to find out until after the sale closed. And he leaned back in his chair, studying me before saying, "Barbara, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about this? Because once you sell, there's no going back and your children will be furious." And I answered that my children hadn't spoken to me in 8 months, surprised myself by how steady my voice sounded, that they had made it perfectly clear I only mattered to them as a future inheritance, and that they could inherit the memories because the house was mine and I was selling it. We listed the house 2 weeks later. Thomas connected me with a realtor he trusted, a sharp woman named Susan who understood the need for discretion. We priced it competitively at $875,000. Susan had professional photos taken and staged it beautifully, and within 3 days we had multiple offers. And I accepted an offer of $910,000 from a young couple expecting their first child. The irony not lost on me as I sold the house where I had raised my family to a couple just starting theirs, hoping they would fill it with more love than mine had shown me. With the closing set for 45 days out, and during those 45 days, I planned my escape with military precision, researching cities I had always wanted to visit, looking at apartments in places with lower cost of living where my money would stretch further, and where no one knew me or my history. Finally settling on Asheville, North Carolina, a place Richard and I had visited once 30 years ago, where I had fallen in love with the mountains, the art scene, and the gentle pace of life. Finding a beautiful 2-bedroom condo with a mountain view for $320,000 that I could buy outright with no mortgage and still have more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. And I started packing slowly and carefully, sorting through 43 years of memories, deciding what to keep, what to donate, and what to throw away. Every photo album, every piece of furniture, every dish and decoration holding a story, some making me smile, and most making me sad, with the hardest part being the photos. Boxers and boxers spanning decades of baby pictures, birthday parties, graduations, and weddings, because I had been the family archivist documenting every milestone and holiday. And I stared at a photo of 5-year-old Jennifer on Christmas morning, her face glowing with joy as she opened presents, wondering where that little girl had gone and what had turned her into someone who could cut her mother out so completely. And in the end, I packed just one photo album to take with me, and left the rest boxed in the basement for whoever bought the house to deal with, letting them wonder about the family in the pictures and imagine we were happy. 3 weeks before closing, Jennifer called me for the first time in 9 months, my heart leaping when I saw her name on my phone, and foolish hope rushing in that maybe she had changed her mind or missed me, or that the nightmare was ending. But her voice was bright and false as she said she had been thinking about me and asked how I was, and after polite questions she apologized, saying they had overreacted about the money thing, and that family mattered more than money. The irony almost making me laugh, before she invited me to dinner that Sunday with the whole family. And I knew exactly what it was about, that they had seen the for sale sign, or heard from a neighbor and were panicking. So I lied and agreed, but on Sunday, instead of going, I sent a group text to all 3 of my children at 4:45, saying I wasn't feeling well and had to cancel, and hoped they had a nice evening. Then turned off my phone and imagined them waiting, calling, growing frustrated and angry and afraid, while I felt nothing but a strange, peaceful numbness, The closing happened on a Tuesday morning in mid-May. I signed document after document with a steady hand. Susan handed me a check for $862,000 after fees and commissions, and as I stared at it, representing everything Richard and I had built, I felt the weight of my old life lift from my shoulders. The buyers glowing with excitement about their future, the husband talking about the backyard for their daughter, and I wished them well, and meant it. Walking out of the lawyer's office, a free woman, and that same afternoon pulling up to my new condo in Asheville where the moving company had delivered my carefully selected belongings the day before. Not much really, just a bedroom set, my favorite chair, some books, my clothes, and that one photo album. Everything else sold, donated, or left behind. And as I stood on the third-floor balcony overlooking the mountains, in a space a fraction of the size of my old house, clean and simple and unburdened by memories of betrayal, I knew it was perfect. I stood on that balcony, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, breathing deeply in a way that felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years, knowing I had left a note for my children at the old house, taped to the kitchen counter, where I was certain they would eventually find it. A note I had spent hours writing and rewriting, searching for words that could possibly hold everything I felt, and in the end I kept it simple, addressing Daniel, Jennifer, and Michael, telling them that by the time they read it I would be gone and the house would belong to someone else, that I knew they were angry and felt betrayed, but that they needed to understand that for the last 5 years they had treated me like a bank account with a pulse, taking and taking and taking, and when I finally said no, they erased me from their lives, stopped calling, cut me out, and made it clear I only mattered to them as a source of money and a future inheritance, that I had heard Patricia on the phone talking about waiting for me to die so they could get the house, and so I had made the decision easy for them because they no longer had to wait, that I was gone, and so was their inheritance, that I hoped the $300,000 I had given them over the years was worth losing their mother, that I hoped when they reached my age their children treated them better than they had treated me, that the house was sold, the money was mine, and I was starting over somewhere they would never find me, signing it simply, Barbara. I made copies of that note and mailed them to each of my children's homes to arrive the day after closing because I wanted them to get the news separately, privately, unable to immediately join forces and strategize, forced to sit alone with what they had lost, what they had thrown away, and what their greed had cost them. And that same evening, after I turned my phone back on in it began ringing relentlessly, Jennifer first, then Daniel, then Michael, over and over, every call going straight to voicemail, and I listened once to the messages, a parade of rage, disbelief, and accusations. Jennifer shrieking that I had stolen from them, and that the house was their inheritance. Daniel's voice cold with fury, as he warned I would regret this and said family doesn't treat family this way, and Michael sounding more hurt than angry, which almost made me laugh because the irony was completely lost on him, and after that I deleted every message and blocked all 3 numbers. The first month in Asheville felt strange because I kept waiting for guilt, regret, or some overwhelming maternal instinct to force me to reach out, but it never came, and instead there was peace, real and genuine peace I hadn't felt in years, as I joined a book club at the local library, took watercolor classes at the community center, volunteered twice a week at a women's shelter helping others rebuild their lives, and made real friends who liked me for who I was and not for what I could give them, including Margaret, a 72-year-old retired teacher who lived 2 doors down, and one morning over coffee, about 2 months after my move, she asked about my family, the first person to do so directly, and I told her carefully that I had 3 children but we were not in contact, and she nodded without pressing, saying that sometimes the people who should love us the most are the ones who hurt us the worst. And when I asked about her children, she told me she had 2 sons, one who died in a car accident at 23, and the other, with whom she hadn't spoken in 15 years, because they had different ideas about what family meant. And when I asked if she regretted the estrangement, she stirred her coffee slowly, and said she regretted that he chose money over their relationship and became someone she didn't recognize, but she did not regret protecting herself, even a little, telling me that there comes a point where you must choose between preserving your dignity or preserving a relationship that is already dead because you cannot do both. And her words settled something inside me I hadn't realized was still unsettled. About 3 months after my move, I received a certified letter from an attorney representing all three of my children, claiming they were contesting the sale of the house, accusing me of mental incompetence, undue influence by my financial advisor, and insisting that as my children they had a right to inherit the family home. And after reading it twice, I called my own lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia, who specialized in elder law. And when she read their claims, she actually laughed and said, "Barbara, this is nonsense. You were evaluated by your doctor as mentally competent," Patricia told me calmly, "and you made a legal sale of property you owned outright, which means your children have no legal standing whatsoever, and this is nothing more than a desperate attempt at intimidation." So when I asked what I should do, she said nothing, that she would respond to their attorney, shut it down, and that would be the end of it, though she did ask whether I wanted her to include a cease and desist, to make it clear they were not to contact me further. And as I thought about my children, probably huddled together with their lawyer, convinced they could bully or manipulate me back into their lives and back into my role as their personal bank account, I said firmly yes, make it very clear. And Patricia drafted a response that left no room for interpretation, stating that my children had no claim to my property, no right to my money, and no standing to question my choices. And that legal letter marked the end of their attempts to reach me, because after her response made it clear they had no case, the calls and emails stopped completely, as if they had finally accepted that I was serious, that I was really gone, and that the money was truly beyond their reach. And I would be lying if I said it didn't hurt, because these were my children, the people I had carried in my body, raised, and loved with every fiber of my being. And there were moments when I would see a grandmother with her grandchildren at the park and feel a sharp pain in my chest, holidays that felt empty despite my new friends, and nights when I lay awake wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. But then I would remember Patricia's voice at the grocery store laughing about waiting for me to die. I would remember the 9 months of complete silence, the erasure, the casual cruelty of being treated like I didn't exist unless I was writing checks. I would remember how small I had felt, how worthless and used, and the pain would fade and be replaced by something stronger. And 6 months into my new life, I did something I had never done before. I went on a trip by myself, just because I wanted to, spending 2 weeks in Santa Fe wandering through art galleries, eating at wonderful restaurants, staying in a charming bed and breakfast, and buying myself a beautiful turquoise necklace that cost more than I had ever spent on myself before. And every morning I woke up without anxiety, without dread, without the crushing weight of other people's expectations, because I was free. And the money from the house sale combined with my remaining savings meant I could live comfortably for the rest of my life without worry, travel when I wanted, take classes, donate to causes I believed in, and actually enjoy the life Richard and I had worked so hard to build, instead of watching it drain away into the bottomless pit of my children's entitlement. And now I am 70, living a quiet, peaceful life in Asheville that is entirely my own, with friends who value me, hobbies that fulfill me, and a home that is truly mine, free of ghosts and expectations and bitter memories. And when people sometimes ask if I have children, I say yes, but we're not close, and I don't elaborate because their story isn't mine to tell anymore. And of course, I would never have chosen this path if my children had treated me differently, because I would have given anything to have them in my life as real family rather than users. But they made their choice, and I made mine. And they wanted an inheritance, but instead they got a lesson they will carry for the rest of their lives. Because you can't inherit from someone you've already lost. And they lost me long before I sold that house. They lost me the moment they decided I was worth more dead than alive. And I disappeared just like I said I would, and I have never been happier, because this is my life now and it belongs to nobody but me, and that is all the justice I ever needed.